Welcome to this month's CCI video update, highlighting all the great work from schools who received the Comprehensive Counseling Initiative grant from the Lilly Endowment. Today, our guest is Erin Good of Sense here on the southeast side of Indianapolis. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you.
So, Erin, I was wondering if you might talk just for a minute about the comprehensive counseling model that Sense chose or selected to implement as part of the grant, and how that implementation is going.
Sure. Well, we chose to focus on the ASCA national model while also incorporating a trauma-informed schools model. So we kind of did a hybrid of both. We are in our fourth and final year of the grant. So we are finishing up with really what we set out to do. There were some, turns and twists along the way where we adjusted as necessary, but we're really finishing up on what we had planned to do and are kind of focusing on some of those gaps that we didn't notice when we wrote the grant. So for example, as part of our trauma-informed work, we didn't specifically focus on racial trauma and equity work, and that is a piece that we definitely want to highlight and create more competency around in our school. So we really, as far as our ASCA national model, the areas we wanted to strengthen in our trauma-informed schools areas, we've completed those, but we've now opened our eyes to a lot of other avenues we want to take too.
Sure. Yeah. I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about the racial equity and trauma, along with the trauma-informed approach that you're taking, and kind of where you are now, and what maybe you've added or changed.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have brought in a speaker, and we just started out very basic about bias. So very beginning level to kind of introduce our teachers to, hey, this is the direction we're heading. This is kind of our framework, and we're going to dive deeper into it. We also started an equity team, and that's really the core of our work. So it's myself and the other mental health professionals in our school, and then just teacher volunteers who volunteer to be part of the team. And so we divided into subcommittees, 4 subcommittees. So we're focusing on retention, curriculum, community outreach, and discipline. And so each one of our subcommittees is kind of focusing on best practices and how to incorporate those things into our school. And then we'll start rolling those out. So this was our first year with that equity committee. And then hopefully all of our brainstorming from this year will start to be implemented next year.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, in addition to that, are there other strategies or activities that you're really excited about? And I know this is the end of your grant, so maybe looking back, were there any in particular that really stood out, or that you felt like just really went well or were really successful?
Yeah, I think one of our game changers was transforming how we did in-school suspension. So we used to have a traditional ISS room where students who were struggling in the classroom went to this room with work and would complete that work outside of their classroom with the staff personnel. And we actually did away, so we don't have an in-school suspension, and we replaced that with our student success room, and it is staffed with a social worker. So if students are struggling behaviorally, our dean of students will help her meet with them, will connect them, and they'll work on strategies for, whatever the struggle was for that student. Maybe they need a break, maybe they need mediation between them and their teacher or another peer. So it's really much more counseling based, and in line with the ASCA national model, because it's that delivery piece versus before ISS wasn't really connected with my programming at all, with the counseling program. So that I think has been the biggest game changer, just giving a different approach to behavioral issues in school, and also that piece of mediating between peers so they can repair their relationships, and between teachers and a student. Because sometimes you have consistently the same issues coming up day after day, and you don't want to just keep going round and round the same wheel all the time. So that has helped to kind of shift some of their relationships and some of those dynamics to make the students more successful too.
Yeah, great. Well, do you have a particular story you might be willing to share about something that is working well, either with the alternative to suspension, or any of the other initiatives or strategies that you've done, and kind of what made that so successful?
Yeah. I guess one recent that comes to mind for our alternative to in-school suspension is one of our teachers and another student had consistently had the same struggles all year with that student not really completing work, not being motivated, causing disruptions. And they did mediation with our student success coordinator, the one who has the social work background. And they found out that they actually had a lot in common in their background, the teacher and that student. And so they were really able to connect and I think understand each other and see each other as, I wouldn't necessarily say allies, but people that they could relate to, as opposed to going into this classroom every day and feeling like you are entering enemy territory.
Right.
So I think, things like that come up when you just really have the time to talk to a student that teachers don't really get, when you're trying to meet
Absolutely.
standards and manage 25 kids in a classroom. When you do have the opportunity to have those one-on-one moments, I think those are some of the most powerful stories that come out of that type of programming.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, kind of on a different note, can you think of, looking back now that you're almost at the end, a disappointment or a setback that you and your grant team faced, and maybe how that challenge or setback actually, maybe set up for later success or ended up, turning out differently than you had thought originally?
Yeah. Well, I would say so. We did the exploratory grant with the Lilly, and during that phase, we did like a trauma-informed schools course and helped our teachers understand about the ASCA national model and just kind of what we were striving for. And they were very excited, very passionate. When it got to the first year of implementation, we definitely hit a speed bump where I think in theory, a lot of these things sound good, but as they started to actually implement it, it became very overwhelming. And that was an oversight, honestly, on our part, myself as part of the counseling program and the admin, of just not giving them enough, I think, emotional support for what they were going to encounter as they started to change the way they did discipline, change the way they interacted with students. They became definitely overwhelmed with the emotion, with the trauma, with the stories that were coming out of it. And it kind of became one of those things where it started to go a little bit downhill of like, maybe trauma-informed doesn't work. And so we really had to step back and think, okay, how are we going to support teachers because they're feeling overwhelmed and starting to question what we're doing. And it's really just coming out of a place of, honestly, secondary trauma, where they are hearing all these things and experiencing the aftermath of these initiatives, which we believe in, but just aren't equipped to deal with. I mean, in teacher programs, I had asked them at one point, and they're like, no, we do not talk about self-care. We don't, they don't get that piece. Right. So that was definitely an unanticipated setback. And so that was one of the amendments we made to our grant, as we went back in and we rewrote and we rebudgeted a few things to create some initiatives for teacher self-care. So some support groups for them and just like some monthly pick-me-ups or focuses on individual teachers who have had hard situations with students in their class that week, and really focused on supporting their mental health and not just our students.
Yeah. So along those lines, maybe related to that or maybe related to some of the other components of your grant, any books or resources or materials that you would really recommend, especially maybe to other schools that are considering trauma-informed practices? Anything that you ran across that really helped?
Yeah, the first book that I was talking about that got our teachers so excited about some of this is a book called Trauma Sensitive Schools, and it's by Susan Craig. And that just there's so much literature out there, but that book does a good job of actually helping you think of actual implementation steps along with the theory behind like the brain science. So it kind of bridges both pieces. I would also recommend Star Global is a company based in Michigan, and they do a lot of work with trauma-informed schools. And that's where during the exploratory grant, we took their trauma-informed schools course. And again, that's what got teachers very excited about it and very invested. So I would recommend that course as well, just as a basis to kind of start to understand. They don't directly connect it to the ASCA national model, so that's kind of where your school counselor or whoever else has to help bridge that piece of this is delivery and this is, different components of that. But as far as the piece that the teachers really need to understand, those I would say are the really good place to start.
Right. Great. Thank you. Well, along with resources and materials, is there a particular community partner or organization that the school counseling program has maybe collaborated with or has really supported the work that you've been doing through the grant?
Yeah, Star Global was our main supporter, and we did work very closely with them. We took several of their courses, and they came in and did several workshops and presentations for our teachers to help them get on board and understand. And then we were also actually trained, so I can now present those courses to our teachers as well. But yeah, they came in and did a lot of evaluation and did a lot of feedback and a lot of that stuff that honestly, as a school counselor, sometimes you don't have time to do. Right. So being able to outsource it to them and knowing this is a critical piece of where we're going, but I don't necessarily have time for the assessment part of our model or things like that. That was crucial for us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know that you're at the end of your grant period, and of course, sustainability is always a big part of that, or a big focus, especially with this grant. Where are you, do you feel like, in terms of sustainability now that you're at the end? Are there particular things that you were able to continue going? And if so, how did you work to get that sustainability there? Or are there things that, now that you're at the end, you feel like, well, those may not be sustained as easily?
Yeah, I think that was always in the back of our mind. I mean, since the exploratory grant is when this money runs out, how are we going to continue this? Because we definitely don't want to bring in all this programming and train teachers and then at the end of the 4 years, just go back to how we did it before. So I think there was a number of things that we focused on to make sure that we can sustain it. So again, I'm trained in I did a train the trainers course, so I can train those Star Global courses that we had previously purchased through the grant. So we're not dependent on that money to train and get new staff up to speed. I can do that programming. We also worked gradually to create, there was a position created in our grant. So we worked to get that into our general funds budget gradually. So it's not just like all of a sudden this full salary needs to be in there. And then we also looked for outside funding. So we last year got the Project Aware grant, which is through the IDOE and focus on student mental health. So some of these pieces, like the equity piece I was talking about, that we noticed we did not anticipate, needing sustainability for because we didn't know it was there. We're using that money to kind of continue this programming on as well. So I think it was just a few different things, but really it was being intentional from the beginning about this is what we want to do. And right. We need to make sure that we're planning that this can continue after the Lilly grant is done.
Well, Erin, thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks to everyone who is listening in and joining us here on the Comprehensive Counseling Initiative video update. We appreciate you joining us today. Thanks so much.
No problem. Happy to be here.